Moving away from the horse race side of the election, we turn to an overview with Dr. Peter Graefe, Associate Professor of Political Science at McMaster University. Doctor, welcome to Forum Daily.
I'm happy to be here.
Now, sir, what would you say has been the main theme of this federal election so far?
Well, it started with Justin Trudeau declaring non-confidence in his own government. So in many ways, I think the theme has really been around which of the party leaders has the confidence and the competence to lead Canada through the end of this pandemic into whatever comes next.
All right, sir, and this is quite a unique election considering it's during a pandemic, a nationwide pandemic. So what kind of influences and impacts has COVID-19 had on the race so far?
It's been really a bit surprising how little it's had. It's obviously affected the way that the politicians have been campaigning. One might have thought that Mr. Trudeau would enjoy a much bigger halo effect from, the success of the vaccine rollout. But if we look at people's choice of who the preferred prime minister would be, or the sort of a net leader approval rating, Mr. Trudeau is actually not that popular coming out of that. I mean, the bigger impact may be more on the Conservative campaign, both in terms of trying to deal with the question of vaccination, which I think has split that party internally and has driven a certain number of voters towards the People's Party. And I think now more recently with the crisis in Alberta, the decision of Mr. O'Toole to praise Alberta's approach to responding to the pandemic is probably something he kind of regrets that he had done.
All right, sir, jumping to what's important to our voters, from what you've observed, what seem to be the top three concerns of Canadian voters so far?
Well, I think one's an age-old one about affordability. About half of Canadians are about $200 per paycheck away from, being in the red. And so there's that constant concern of affordability. As in 2019, I think the question of climate change is important, maybe even more important than last time. And I think finally, at least when we're looking at central Canada and Ontario in particular, questions of housing have become much more prominent than they've been in recent elections.
And from what you've been seeing, have the parties addressed these concerns adequately?
Well, I think they've addressed them in their platforms. Whether they've convinced a lot of Canadians with them, is another story. I think, all the parties have their little gimmicks in terms of promising people that they'll be better off, on their cell phone bills or, through this tax credit or that tax credit. I think they've been doing that long enough that Canadians aren't really following them on that. And then there's questions, the NDP proposes pharmacare and coverage of dental care, again, which is attractive, for instance, to Canadians working in jobs where they don't have that coverage in their work. Probably doesn't do a lot for, the other part of the population that does have some coverage and doesn't see the benefit in that.
All right, sir, just about a minute and a half left here, but what are the top battleground ridings to watch for across the country?
Well, I think there's a lot of close ones. And in many ways, you look at what races were close last time because they'll be affected by kind of overall polls, which show the Liberals down a little, the Conservatives pretty stable or maybe down a shade from last time, and the NDP up. But not that much, So I think if we follow the leaders, we'll really see what they think the hot ridings are. So, as you mentioned, Mr. Trudeau's in Windsor, where he risks losing a riding, but maybe picks one up from the NDP. Mr. O'Toole's in St. Catharines, where they hope to take back Rick Dykstra's old seat in St. Catharines. So it's really, I think, by following the leaders, you get a sense of where they have ridings that they're trying to protect or where they may see a possibility for growth.
All right, sir, just about a minute left here. But considering this is a pandemic-fueled election, tensions are high. We've seen a lot of negative incidents during the campaign trail. We've seen gravel thrown at Justin Trudeau, an election sign being destroyed, and an assault of a candidate in Sudbury. So how do you think these incidents affect both this election and Canada's overall democratic participation going forward?
Yeah, I don't think they'll have a huge impact, but over time they may. And so it's important that our political leaders are clear in opposing these, but also making sure that within their own houses, right, that they aren't, pandering to people or being willing to discuss to people, willing to go to the extent of using violence in our campaigns. There was some evidence showing that maybe a third of young people were beginning to worry about their safety going to vote. I don't think that's going to have an impact on voter turnout. But again, in the longer run, I think we should be concerned if violence begins to creep into our elections. Canada's blessed with an excellent elections administration. We don't see a lot of the problems like we saw in the States in their presidential campaign. But it takes ongoing work by our parties, politicians, and civic leaders to make sure that we keep it that way.